Why would an entrepreneur decide that hiring C-grade students and not A-grade students is the way forward? Well, today we're going to find out. I'm speaking with Aditya Siripragada, who is the founder of Fountaine. Now, Fountaine is a digital product studio and a venture lab. It's changing the traditional consulting model. And in this episode, Aditya explains very clearly how they started off doing consulting and then they saw an opportunity. And they did a reframe of their business and a re-understanding of the true business that they were in. Really allowed them to innovate and become one of America's fastest growing firms on the Inc. 5000. This is a really interesting interview. Aditya started his business himself as a failing student, a C-grade student. He felt he couldn't get a job through the usual channels. So he decided that he had no other choice but to go into entrepreneurship. And it's been an incredible success. And he explains a lot of things, including how he looks at founders and helps identify which founders are most likely to succeed with their business ideas. He has 2 Ds that he's going to share around how you identify founder market fit, which is a really, really helpful concept for anybody starting a business or looking to invest in somebody else's early stage business. So Aditya is incredible, young but very successful entrepreneur. Hope you enjoy this conversation with Aditya Siripragada. Welcome to the Impact Multiplier CEO podcast. I'm Richard Metcalf, founder of X Quadrant, and my mission is to help the world's top CEOs and entrepreneurs shift from incremental to exponential progress and create a huge positive impact on our world. Now, that requires you to reinvent yourself and transform your business. So, if you're ready to play a bigger game than ever before, I invite you to join us and become an Impact Multiplier CEO. Hi, Aditya, and welcome to the show.
Hey, Richard. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome. This is going to be interesting because what I know about you is that you're the founder of Fountaine, which has won the Inc. Top 5000 award for being one of the fastest growing businesses. I know you've doubled your revenue annually for 6 years. You now have 125 people across the US and India. And you're a digital product studio and a venture lab. So you do some consulting, you do some venture work, and you've kind of got a different model about this. Now, most leaders talk about how they've got an A team, right? A grade team or whatever it is. And when we had an initial conversation, you said that you built this business, and to quote you said, "I built it with C-grade students." So, tell me about that. Why are you celebrating that you got C-grade students in the mix? Tell me more.
I'm so glad that you remember that, and wonderful job on the introduction, Richard. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it, and it's an honor to have this conversation with you. And the C-grade student analogy really resonates with me. For one is that I am a C-grade student. I think I've told you this, but the thing that I really love about C-grade students is that we don't care about failing. And in fact, for us, the idea of getting a success is actually something that we'd celebrate. Then failing to us is normal, and that's how startups and innovation is, right? It's not about the 10 times that you fail, it's the one time that you succeed that matters, right? And when I had founded Fountaine at the age of 19, I wasn't really a very successful student. And in fact, me and my co-founder started this company because we weren't able to get any internships in college. Because we weren't able to get internships, we said, let's start our own company. And if we succeed, it's going to be awesome. And if we fail, we have a great story to tell on our resume so that we can get a job. As we, ventured out and started hiring people, one of the things that we've noticed is that the other folks that couldn't get a job was other C-grade students. And because those are the only talent that was available in the market, we hired them. But turns out that they were the most risky and the most wanting to take any kinds of risk out there. And when we created our first startup in less than 90 days that got funded at a $10 million valuation, that actually happened just because a bunch of C students came together. So there is this power of a C student, just this no fear and this like, no risk of like embracing a failure. And at startups, I think you need a lot of C students.
Yeah. So it's really fascinating, right? Because first of all, in my clients, some of my clients are incredibly successful leaders, and quite a high proportion of them actually, I think, have this inner shame about actually I didn't get the degree, or I dropped out, or I took a different path, and like they're absolutely nailing it in the world, and yet there's this kind of educational shame that they still have, perhaps after many years. And some of them go back and they do a degree later in life just to prove to themselves that they can do it, that they're not dumb. Obviously not dumb people, right? Very successful. So that's just one thing that's coming to my mind. And then I suppose the other is, have you tried recruiting kind of A grade students and found actually they're not taking the risks, or then they're trying too hard to be right and to follow the instructions? I'm kind of wondering whether you've seen it like that, because often people I see are always, are going, we need to recruit these A players, and what by A players they mean a resume that looks impressive, right? But that's not necessarily what you want to.
So certainly, right? Like I'm not necessarily, looking at people's resumes and saying, "Oh, you have a C, then you're in," or like to say that, "Hey, you have an A and you don't fit in here." Certainly, like that's not the criteria that we look at. But when we look at an A student, and we've had like several A students in our company, what happens is that like A students are unable to take the smallest amount of uncertainty, is like the way that we look at it. Yeah. When I say uncertainty, there are at times that we're unable to like pay salaries on time. Like this is not now, but there's a couple of years ago, like where if we say that we're going to pay salaries by the third, like sometimes it's the fourth or the fifth, like we're able to pay, and like they're not able to take that uncertainty like the same way that C students are able to. And there's like several anecdotes that I can give around the same line, where A students kind of expect that life to be certain, because what's been really told to them is that if you do this, then this, right? Like they live life in a very functional way, if this then that way, and they're not open to this idea that tomorrow may be different than what's being told to you, right? So it's not that like C students have this like anything unique than A students, and it's not that A students have like this radically high IQ. I think what it is just mindset. I think A students or C students are intellectually very similar. Everything is very similar. It's just the mindset. C students have this mindset of really being able to take uncertainty to their advantage, while A students are not. And it's not like we're shying away from A students. It's just that like C students work well in our firm.
Yeah. So do you think this is around kind of perhaps C students wanting to prove something, as in prove how good they are, and perhaps A students are trying to prove, like the other way around, trying to defend their self-perception of, I'm one of the best, right? Because it's my schooling, I was one of the best, therefore I've got to like not mess up.
Exactly right. And I look at this like very similar, right? Like, even in politics, there's a left versus right. Like one person is trying to disrupt, the other person is trying to preserve the status quo. So I look at A as like, status quo preservation, and C is like, okay, let's change things up because it's more fun and we want to live a fun life.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So tell me about, like, obviously setting up any business is a risky thing, right? On some level. What were some of the kind of uncertainties or risks that you took yourself in those earlier stages? Like, where do you think you brought your maverick soul to bear, in the growth of the business? And what moves did you make, which were perhaps unorthodox?
So I was an international student. I moved from India to the US at the age of 17 to go to the University of Minnesota for my undergrad. And all students want to get an internship in college, and it's a no-brainer when you're an international student and spending hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I couldn't land even an interview. Nobody would look at me. I had the lowest possible GPA. I had just enough GPA to stay in school. So, I just didn't fit into the system. And one of the recruiters once told me, hey, Aditya, you want to get placed, but look at yourself and compare yourself against other international students. You really got no choice but to find a way to go back to India. Under that moment, I said to myself, I have 3 years left in the US. what do I really want to do to maximize my chances? And that was to like potentially start a business, because there's no other place I can start a business outside of the US that can like really give me 100x. And the way that I looked at it is that I don't have a better alternative than starting a business. A lot of people, like in hindsight, tell me, "How did you take the risk to start a business?" And I keep telling them, I didn't have a choice. Like, it's not like, I wanted to go start a business. I was happy working, but like, nobody would give me a job. So
Right.
in hindsight, like, waiting it out and waiting for a job was more riskier than to like take life into my own hands and start a business.
Right. Yeah, so often I see that, right? Risky is safe and safe is risky very often.
Exactly. Spot on, right? Like the biggest risk is not to take a risk.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. So tell me about your business. So why have you set it up in the way you have, right? Obviously, it was a consulting business, but it looks like you're doing a few things differently. Yeah, what are you doing differently and why?
So when I did start Fountaine back in college, one of the things that was really inspirational to me is this idea of minimum viable product. There was minimum viable products in the Bay Area. There's this guy called there's this guy that wrote a book called Lean Startup Methodology, and which went pretty viral, right? And the idea of Lean Startup Methodology is to create, lean software. How do you like develop software startups in the least amount of features that possible?
Yeah.
And in the state of Minnesota, where I'm from, there was no companies or service companies that was doing minimum viable products. So the least amount of code that you would get is like nothing below $200,000. So we wanted to create an alternative, and our offering was a $30,000 software building exercise. And the first startup that we helped create actually got funded at a $10 million valuation in less than 90 days. That's when I realized that the game is not necessarily in maximizing the statement of work and trying to like get your client to pay you as much as possible, because the way that service firms exist is like they want to like maximize every penny and want you to build a lot of features. Whereas we said, instead of like trying to be in the business of projects, let's be in the business of business. Let's quickly help our clients go to market. Like, let's get them like adoption, and they're going to come back to us and build the firm with us. So
Right.
we kind of seen ourselves to be in the business of business. And that way, what we've also done is we looked at the world of like, startups as not necessarily as like, hey, let's get more projects done. And we said, let's look at it as an investor, and let's see which startups and which founders have the best bang for buck. Let's also invest in them and take a part of the business. So we played both a role of a service provider and also a role as an incubator, where we had like, equity in a wide variety of startups.
So how did you do that? Because obviously, as a bunch of 19-year-olds suddenly deciding that you wanted to kind of make investment decisions in a whole bunch of very, very early stage company, that's quite a risky business. So how did you presumably you didn't have a whole fleet of Goldman Sachs analysts to do all the number crunching? How was it a gut feeling thing? Was it just the sheer scale of numbers? How did you go about choosing?
The story really stems from my co-founder's experience. Right before my co-founder started this business with me, he was a part of a early founding team at an idea stage for this company called Luxury, a Luxury, and it's a friend from high school that wanted to create an AR app that takes your face and turns it into a rage comic. And my business partner said, that's a pretty dumb idea, but I'm going to work with you because why not? And they developed the initial prototype, and it wasn't that good. And then his friend went to his dad and said, hey, Dad, I want to develop this into a full-fledged product. That's when my co-founder had left that. And the dad and the son kept working on this. They take this to market. Market loves it. And then Snapchat buys it for $150 million.
Okay.
And so that turns out to be the feature in Snapchat where it scans your face and turns into a dog filter and a bunch of different filters. So the technology behind that is this company called Luxury, which Snapchat acquired in 2019. So we saw this idea of enterprise value building through technology pretty early on, and we said, whoa, like if we can like churn out these kind of ideas, there's like tremendous value to capture at an idea stage. And we said, like, we'd rather give up like few tens of thousands of dollars in service value to capture like early stage equity. And when it comes to like how we value these companies, we really like, did discounted cash flow. We did all of that. But at the end, we just said like, hey, like, just give us a part of your company, whatever you're comfortable with. That's how we started out. So started taking 3 to 5% of a bunch of different companies. Now we do a lot of like, discounted. Like now the process is a lot more sophisticated. But back then it was just, it's just like everything else, right?
Yeah.
Like we would discount it by 10,000 and we say like, okay, now give me 3% of the business.
I hope you're enjoying this conversation. This is just a quick interlude to introduce you to 2 transformative programs that we run. The first is Rivendell, my exclusive group of top CEOs who are committed to transforming themselves, their businesses, and the world. It's an incredible peer group and a deep coaching experience that will push you to new heights, no matter how successful you've already been. The second is Impact Accelerator, a coaching program for executives who are ready to make a big leap forward in their own leadership. It's regularly described as life-changing, and no other program provides such personal strategic clarity, a measurable shift in stakeholder perceptions, and a world-class leadership development environment. Find out about both of these programs at xquadrant.com/services. Now back to the conversation. Nice. And so if I was a cash-strapped startup wanting your services now, like what would I have to demonstrate to get you to kind of want to invest, your time in the business?
Yeah, well, ideas are dime a dozen, and we quickly were able to attract a lot of ideas. And getting demand wasn't really a problem for us. We saw a lot of like founders wanting to get started. To us, like the most important thing was domain and distribution. I call it the D square. What is the founder building? Do they have any unique value in the market? Unique value for the for the idea that others don't, right? It's this idea called founder market fit. Does the founder have any unique advantage to take this idea to the market than anybody else in the market? That's like, and distribution is, do they have the first set of customers to get them to $1 million in ARR? So that's kind of like, what we used to look at to get started. And if we think like the founder had domain and distribution, we'd say like, okay, let's build it.
Nice. Yeah. A simple rule of thumb to get you going. Yeah. What was the biggest failure that you had, like, or the biggest learning, like where you really misjudged something or you put resources into something which didn't end up working? I'm sure.
I think we hear this way too often, which is this idea that ideas are a dime a dozen, and good ideas are actually not that important. It's all about the founder. I think I got way too excited by ideas at an early stage, invested in the wrong people, and kept investing resources year on year. The problem with this kind of a business model is that you have to pay your employees month over month, and these are fixed salaries. But then you're waiting for a huge liquidity event to happen, the next investor coming on board, next seed round, the Series A round. That shit never happens. So instead, like, focusing to build it on and investing in the right people is like what I realized. Now I realize why investors, like, without even seeing anything, without even seeing a full-fledged product, just like write a $500,000 check to an individual or a team. Because at the end of the day, you're betting on the people and not the idea. I wish I had known this earlier. And now that I have seen this work in real time, I'm betting on people now. If I see the right individual, I don't care what they want to build, I'll work with them.
Right. And so what do you look for in the people? So what would be your mental checklist?
I think it's like demonstration of like what a startup would be. A lot of times what happens is like it's a prior founder that's built something, but what are ways that they're showing foundership? Yeah. So what I mean by that is there's a lot of entrepreneurs in enterprises that have led transformations, right? A lot of times executives in enterprises, they are getting paid to keep the status quo running like it is. Very few executives say it's my burden to change the way it works, although they're not rewarded for it. They're really doing like this shadow operation where they take on a lot of risk to change the way that these enterprises work. So we like those kind of things. We look for individuals that have demonstrated some kind of a transformation despite all odds, and we want to bet on those individuals.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because even the most dynamic, ambitious corporate exec who might even see themselves as an entrepreneur or, entrepreneurial spirit, until the moment that it's actually your own personal money on the line, it's not the same.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, we've had one of my clients just recently, amazing leader. When I first started working with him, he was managing director of his business. He built it really from zero, but within a larger structure, and really nailed it in many ways. And yeah, he realized the future of the business was probably going to be better served outside the current investor structure. That set a real internal process going with him, which I helped him work through around, do I see am I actually an entrepreneur and risk taker and put my money on the line and all the rest of it? Or am I just a good operational leader? And it's really an identity question, right? And, he had to work through that. He actually, God bless him, actually said, you know what? I'm born to do this. I have to do this. And he went all in. He put his own money on the line. He raised millions. He bought up, put a deal together to buy out his company, right? But that does, and I was, privy to that journey, the ups and the downs, supporting him in that, like looking at it all. And it was really fascinating, right? Because he did ignite, he's all in. And I know when he's all in on something, he makes amazing things happen. But my point was, on one level, it's the same job. He's running a company inside a structure, or he's actually, it's his own company and he's running the same company. In one level, it's the same job, but on the other hand, it requires a very different internal commitment because it's usually more money.
100%. You're so right. This idea of you're doing the same job, but are you playing it on house money or are you playing it on your own money?
Exactly. So it's a fascinating one. So tell me about where you're going next as a business, right? Because obviously you've done this for several years now. You've got to a certain level. What's it going to be like for your business to multiply its impact within the world, right? For Fountaine to get to the next level. So what's the next level for the business?
Yeah. No, that's a great question, Richard. So we've done this for the last 7 years with startups, and I would say small businesses, and we've done it pretty well. But when I look at professional services broadly, I look at this idea of trying to maximize a client budget to get statement of works done, and that's the business model of services, right? Trying to get $1 million client to go to 3 to 5, 5 to 8, 8 to 15, 15 to 30. It's really how do you maximize the IT budget or marketing budget of your client? That's the model. And they're never liable for business outcomes. They're liable for projects getting done, but they never, that's why there's jokes on consultants that consultants never get real shit done, because they're always they're kind of a scapegoat tactic for executives when shit goes south, right? But consulting can be a force for good in a lot of ways. And I look at what Y Combinator has done in startup world is being this platform where innovation can happen at scale for startups. And when I look at a lot of enterprises today, their model of innovation is mergers and acquisitions. I have free cash flow. I go up and buy the next hot thing. I mean, we talk about Cisco, right? You've been at ex-Cisco, and one of my friends, Nitan, he sold a company called Epsagon to Cisco for $530 million. And, that was a 4-year startup. I couldn't believe it. It was a ridiculously good sum. But Cisco, companies like Cisco, ServiceNow, Oracle, they have a huge pile of cash year on year. And they're not, innovating. They're buying innovation from the market and adding that to their sales engine. Yeah. And this is basically any enterprise today in that Fortune 500 list. So the model that we look at is should you buy or should you build it in-house? And how can we make enterprises act like startups in the sense that, like, how can we like get key individuals in the enterprise world to say, hey, let's take a small budget, let's take like, a siloed team, let's get to innovate with them at the same scale that a startup does, and let's bring that to your distribution. And simultaneously, your M&A teams can go like scout out deals, but we can guarantee you that will build you the same amount of enterprise value that a startup that you're acquiring would do in less than like 18 months, right? So we have this like venture creation model that is gaining a lot of momentum, and we want to bring this to scale.
So a lot of companies that seem to have tried these kind of things with large corporates, getting them to be more innovative. I suppose part of me is always like, yeah, but when people are not incentivized, like in a startup, do they have the hunger if they're on a fat corporate paycheck, with job security and all the rest of it, right? Is it just about the technical component of like helping them build their MVP, or are there deeper issues which are going to need to be addressed?
There is a whole plethora of issues outside of building the technology. If it's as simple as building the technology, there wouldn't really be a whole professional services world out there, right? Yeah. We actually we view ourselves less as a tech shop and more as a strategy shop. We actually have a lot of people working in the strategy department in the US, and the goal is not to like build the tech. The goal is to understand user problems in user journeys and to figure out how do you give them higher levels of efficiency than what they are experiencing today. And it's about like, solving user appetites for technology, because there in technology, what happens is change management. You can have the best thing in the world, but is there like user appetite to like adopt them?
Yeah. So, I mean, if we're kind of bringing this down, my question about how Fountaine is going to need to change is, you say what you're doing is you're moving from this kind of equity-based startup model to looking at what's it going to take to really deliver on the corporate innovation agenda.
Exactly. As I was saying, like, for us, the big thing that we're solving for is, let's talk about like how M&A works at the core, right? How M&A works is, let's just say something like a United Health Group is saying, hey, we look at this like new way of like, doing this kind of an insurance. And there's a company that we're trying to acquire that's like currently $4 billion of like enterprise value. And if we want to acquire them, we want to pay like maybe 15% premium on what their like last round of valuation is. And how are you valuing the startup at like $5 billion? Because they have like so many insured patients or whatever it may be, right? So there is one or two key metrics that the CIO or the CTO is looking at and saying, we are wanting to acquire the startup for those metrics. It could be like number of patients insured. It could be some unique technology. It could be their free cash flow. The idea of corporate innovation is not that we are able to build that whole startup for them overnight. It's that like, can we show them a model where in less than like 6 months or in less than a year, we can build like 15% of what they built with that like, competing startup. Same thing with like how I look at like with the Google, like, when you look at a Microsoft Teams versus Slack was first to market, and they had a whole distribution of market share in enterprises and startups. But it took Teams like less than 2 years to get all of Slack's customers and more users. That's because Microsoft had an inbuilt user base of enterprise.
Yeah.
So the idea is not that like, you're building all of Slack overnight. The idea is, can you show them some confidence that like, that it's actually working in that direction? Instead of spending $27 billion on Slack, can you spend maybe $25 million on a project that can show early signs of Slack disruption internally?
Got it. Yeah, fascinating. So I want to be wrapping up soon, because it's been a fascinating conversation, but I want to make sure I ask my favorite question, which is, as you make this shift, right, as Fountaine moves from the world of startups and also includes the world of corporate innovation, and creating these proofs of concept that you've been talking about, how do you need to change your leadership, right, to multiply your impact? We've talked about this. You're a founder at heart. You're a disruptor. You've made these big changes in your own life and career and built businesses. what's your next level, right? How are you going to get to your 10x? What's coming to mind when I ask you about that, your own personal stretch?
Yeah, I think as a leader, um, impact can be measured on a whole set of things. And I think about this like, very regularly. Are we, measuring ourselves in market value? Are we measuring ourselves in qualitative things like how many lives have we changed and like, people's lives and like, what we've done with our employees or like the community at large? There's multiple ways to like measure impact. To me, I look at myself as for me to show up better and for me to like lead a whole team, the idea is that like, I want to be a better leader myself. I want to be a better individual at scale, right? Like only if I'm able to like, guide the people closest to me to disrupt in the right ways, am I able to like multiply my impact. So it's like, how can I show up myself in a way that like the 10 people next to me are able to multiply their impact? Then only I'm able to multiply my impact on the world. So I think it starts from leadership, right? Like, you can have like a very high individual contributor impact, but as a leader, it only works like if you're able to like have that influence on the 10 people next to you.
Yeah, absolutely true. I talk about transformation and then multiplication, right? So, or incubate and scale. So there's one journey which is to become a great leader. And then there's a second journey, which is to help other people become great leaders. And that's often the journey that people go on. But let me get specific about that because, the word leadership all sounds very big. If I was being provocative, if I was to go around and ask your 10 closest people to you in the business, like, how does it do you need to be a better leader? What do you think they would say? And this is not to deny any of all your great strengths, but just to kind of ask, if you were to ask those people, what would they be encouraging you to look at within your leadership?
I think there's a lot of things that like I'm sure that comes to my mind, but I would say expectation management is a really big thing. I think they would ask me to like push themselves, but like what is the amount, like what is the right amount to push themselves? Like this is something that like, I have issues with. I want the people closest to me to do their life's best work, but I want them to have a work-life balance. So what is the right way to like ask them of things? And what is like, time to back off? And am I showing, up myself like, every day with my best self, right? Like only if a leader gives their 10x, do the people around them want to give their 10x. Do they feel like I'm being my best self at work, and am I being able to like give my best self? And I don't think like people next to you are going to tell you that like, hey, like you're slacking, you're not doing your best work. So maybe like creating this kind of a vulnerable, like making an environment where they feel like they can give you honest feedback, saying like, hey, like I think you can push yourself harder. You're not doing that. So there's a set of things like I do think like there's an opportunity for the people closest to me to give that kind of a feedback, and I'm sure like it will really help me because that kind of conversations don't happen as often as it should.
Yeah, it's really precious, right? It's hard to get feedback often, especially when you're in a position of leadership, right? People don't want to tell you the hard truth. I see it a lot. I was just running a retreat with 10 amazing world-class CEOs and entrepreneurs. And I'll tell you what, I was saying to one of my other clients, it was exhausting. I loved it. We got I think average score of 9.7 out of 10 from these people. So they loved the retreat. But it was intense because there I was having to challenge and push and stretch people, and even just telling them hard truths that I can see that they didn't want to hear or see in themselves. And like, there's a lot of energy required to do that because these people don't get it. They don't get the unfiltered truth from people around them. It can be really hard. And I think the other thing I want to pick on, Aditya, is what you said around like expectation management, because what happens I see often is that driven leaders, have big goals, right? That they're forceful people, right? They've got a big personality. They kind of drive their organization, right? And that's all very well and good, right? Important. And then at the same time, there can be this creeping sense of, perhaps I'm being too much. Perhaps I'm pushing people too much, right? And so actually, in a way, they also almost tone down their level of challenge sometimes to their people because they don't want to like completely burn out their people, right? Or they don't want to be too much and like be unreasonable and so forth. But it's almost like they alternate between too much and not enough, like too demanding and then not actually holding the standards to where they need to be. And I found this a really interesting dynamic in key leaders, because it's what you said, like I want people to like be their best and bring the best. And I don't want to be the jerk of a leader who's just burning his team into the grave either, right? For my own selfish gain.
It's this style of leadership. I'm sure you've heard. You either show the carrot or the stick, and people like Elon Musk and Steve Jobs, they show the stick, right? Like for them, that's their style of leadership. But somebody like a Bill Gates, Satya Nadella, they show the carrot. So there's inside of me, there's obviously this constant challenge of, am I a carrot leader or a stick leader? And I don't see myself as a stick leader, but as a carrot leader, there's only so much that you can keep incentivizing, and incentive is not always the right tool.
Yeah. For me, it's about range, right? So most leaders, we operate in a small section of our range, right? Across support and challenge. And we don't necessarily, some people don't lean into tension enough, right? They're always playing a bit safe. And other people are always kind of driving, and don't actually give people the inspiration and the encouragement to actually do the next step. So it's a fascinating conversation. We could spend probably a lot of time on this all by itself, but I think we are getting, for any leader, listening, we're really thinking about that, right? It's the balance of support and challenge, really what we're talking about here, and to see how do we calibrate them so that people feel really supported and encouraged and being held to their higher standards.
Exactly. It's a tough balancing act, and the best leaders like figure that out, and that's why their companies are so good.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, Aditya, this has been a great conversation. I really enjoyed this kind of fun idea of playing around with what it is to have C-grade students and actually realize about the risk-taking potential, be comfortable with uncertainty that they have, right? I've loved the conversation about business models, around not just going for the consulting mindset and maximizing projects, but taking a business mindset and say, how do we maximize value and get a part of the value, which I think is a really compelling idea. And then obviously moving to the future, to what it's going to take for you to be the leader who builds the business that's at a new scale, deals with corporates, and builds leaders within it. So it's been a really fun conversation, and thank you for doing that.
Likewise, it's been a super fun conversation, Richard.
If people want to get in touch with you or find out more about Fountaine, how do they do that?
So I'm on Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram. On Twitter and Instagram, it's Dealsman, Dealzman. On Instagram, it's Aditya Siripragada, Siripragada. And yeah, if you can feel free to shoot a message, Twitter, Instagram, or LinkedIn. I'm pretty active, and I'm also going to be pushing a lot of shorts from or reels from this podcast too. So it'll be fun.
Hey, that's been great. Thanks so much, Aditya. Looking forward to following along on the journey.
Yeah, likewise.
Well, that's a wrap. If you received value from this conversation, please do leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform. We'd deeply appreciate it. And if you'd like to check out the show notes from this episode, head to xquadrant.com/podcast, where you'll find all the details. Now, finally, when you're in top leadership, who supports and challenges you at a deep level to help you multiply your impact? Discover more about the different ways we can support you at xquadrant.com.